Imagine standing ankle-deep in mud, exhausted, starving, and surrounded by enemies who outnumber you 5 to 1. Your armor feels heavier with every breath, the stench of sweat and blood fills the air, and across the field, glittering in steel and banners, are the Knights of France, the most feared warriors in Europe. On this day, October 25th, 1415, the young King Henry V of England led his ragged, disease-ridden army into what seemed certain death. Yet, by nightfall, against all odds, the flower of French chivalry lay crushed in the mud of Agincourt. How did a band of weary peasants and archers topple the pride of France? Was it luck? Was it genius? Or was it something darker, hidden beneath the myths and legends? Stay with us as we uncover the story of Agincourt, the battle that redefined war, shattered illusions of knightly invincibility, and turned a king into legend. To understand why Agincourt mattered so deeply, we need to step back. The year was 1415, but the roots of this conflict stretched nearly 80 years earlier. In 1337, England's Edward III had claimed the French crown, sparking the 100 Years' War, a brutal saga of raids, sieges, shifting alliances, and blood-soaked fields. Over the decades, English longbowmen had already shown their deadly power at Crécy and Poitiers, humbling French knights with storms of arrows. But the tide had turned. By the late 1300s, England was weakened by internal strife, while France itself was torn apart by a bitter civil war between two rival factions, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. And then, in 1413, a new monarch took England's throne, Henry V. He wasn't just another king. He was young, determined, and deeply devout. He wanted legitimacy at home and glory abroad. Henry revived England's claim to the French crown, demanding land and sovereignty. When France refused, he chose war. That summer, Henry set sail with 12,000 men, knights, men-at-arms, and above all, thousands of longbowmen. They landed in Normandy, besieging the port of Harfleur. But victory came at a terrible price. Dysentery and hunger tore through the English ranks, killing hundreds, leaving thousands too weak to fight. By the time the city surrendered, Henry's army was already reduced to nearly half. Most kings would have returned home, but not Henry. He gambled everything, choosing to march across hostile France toward Calais, knowing the French would gather their strength to stop him. And they did. By mid-October, France had assembled a massive host, 20,000, maybe even 30,000 men, against Henry's meager 6,000. The trap was set. The exhausted English were being herded toward a battlefield that would decide not just a campaign, but the very balance of power in medieval Europe. And so, on the damp, muddy morning of October 25th, the two armies met near a small village, Agincourt. The battlefield of Agincourt looked ordinary, a strip of farmland bordered by dense woods. But the night before the clash, heavy rains transformed it into a quagmire. What seemed like bad luck for Henry's weary soldiers would become the greatest weapon in their hands. The French came confident, radiant in polished steel and fluttering banners. They believed victory was inevitable. Some nobles even rolled dice in their camp, betting on who would claim King Henry as a prisoner. Across the field, the English camp was starkly different. Hungry, bone-tired, quiet. Henry walked among his men, offering words of encouragement, reminding them of duty and destiny. Chroniclers tell us this is where he gave his speech, the one Shakespeare later immortalized, promising his soldiers they would be remembered forever. Whether he spoke those exact words or not, the spirit of defiance was real. At dawn, Henry's men planted sharpened stakes into the ground, a deadly forest of wooden spikes to break cavalry charges. Behind them stood the heart of England's force, nearly 5,000 longbowmen, men hardened by years of training, ready to unleash a storm of arrows. The French, nearly 5 times larger, should have swallowed them whole, but the ground betrayed their numbers. The woods narrowed the field into a tight funnel, forcing them into a corridor where sheer numbers became a curse. When Henry ordered his army to advance closer, a bold gamble, the French nobles, stung by insult, prepared to crush the insolent English once and for all. And then it began. The sky darkened with arrows. Thousands upon thousands whistled down, striking men and horses with terrifying force. Unlike the French crossbow, slow and cumbersome, the longbow could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute. With thousands of archers, it was a relentless storm, an iron rain that pierced armor, felled horses, and shattered formations. French cavalry charged the English flanks, but the mud swallowed their momentum. Horses crashed into sharpened stakes, throwing riders into the muck where archers finished them with knives and hammers. What should have been a thunderous breakthrough dissolved into bloody ruin. Wave after wave of French men-at-arms advanced on foot, their heavy plate armor turning every step into torture. The mud clutched their boots. The press of comrades suffocated them. Some knights drowned where they fell, pinned beneath their own allies. Still, they pushed forward until the first lines reached the English. A brutal melee erupted, sword against sword, mace against helmet, men grappling in the mud. Henry himself fought among his men, his crown dented by the Duke of Alençon before he struck down his attacker. The sight of their king, bloodied but unbroken, lit a fire in the English ranks. "St. George!" they cried, echoing across the field. And here came the twist of fate. The longbowmen, once their arrows were spent, did not retreat. They dropped their bows, picked up axes and mallets, and surged into the melee. Lightly armored, they moved swiftly in the crush, stabbing visor slits, prying joints, dragging knights to the ground like wolves bringing down stags. The flower of French nobility, trapped and suffocating, were slaughtered. Numbers meant nothing when you could not swing a sword, when you were drowning in mud and blood. By midday, the field was hell itself. Corpses of horses and men stacked in heaps, banners torn, the cries of the dying mingling with the relentless clash of steel. And then came Henry's most ruthless order. When word spread that a French cavalry detachment was raiding the English baggage train, Henry feared captured prisoners, nobles worth ransoms, might take up arms. To prevent disaster, he ordered them executed. Hundreds of knights, among France's wealthiest and most prestigious, were cut down where they stood. It was survival, not chivalry, that ruled Agincourt. When the final French division advanced, they had already seen the carnage. Their comrades suffocated in heaps, their finest lords dead in the mud. Morale broke. Their attack faltered almost before it began. By the end of the day, the French host, tens of thousands strong, was shattered by a force barely 1/3 their size. The English lost only a few hundred men. The French lost between 6,000 and 10,000, many of them the cream of their nobility. Dukes, counts, constables, the very pillars of France's political order, lay slain or in chains. By the afternoon of October 25th, Agincourt no longer resembled a battle. It was a massacre. What had begun as a glittering parade of French chivalry, polished armor, noble banners, the pride of medieval knighthood, had dissolved into suffocation, panic, and death. The very strength of France's aristocracy had become its downfall. Knights pressed so tightly together they could not lift their swords. Men fell and drowned beneath the weight of their comrades. Horses collapsed, crushing riders in the sludge. Henry's exhausted army, once mocked as a doomed rabble, now stood as an unbreakable wall. Each French assault collapsed faster than the last. Every wave stumbled into heaps of corpses, their banners sinking into the muck as arrows rained endlessly from above. And then, the unthinkable. The cream of France's nobility was gone in a single day. The Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, was dead. John, Duke of Alençon, slain in his desperate duel with Henry. The Dukes of Bar and Brabant, fallen. Countless other lords either butchered or captured. The battlefield was more than a graveyard. It was a political earthquake. France's leadership had been decapitated in one afternoon. What had been a proud charge for glory now lay in the mud as a cautionary tale of arrogance and division. For Henry V, it was not just victory, it was vindication. A king once doubted, mocked, and pursued by sickness and hunger had transformed into a warrior chosen by destiny. Chroniclers would soon whisper of divine favor. Shakespeare, centuries later, would immortalize his words as the band of Brothers' Speech, sealing the myth of Agincourt in English memory. But behind the legend lies the brutal truth. Agincourt was not a story of noble duels. It was mud, exhaustion, slaughter, and the cold efficiency of common archers bringing down Europe's finest knights. It was not chivalry that triumphed. It was discipline, terrain, and the merciless reality of war. This was the turning point. The illusion of knightly invincibility was shattered. The longbow, once dismissed as a peasant's weapon, had rewritten the rules of battle. Agincourt marked the beginning of the end for the age of armored cavalry and the dawn of modern warfare. When the sun set on October 25, 1415, the fields of Agincourt were unrecognizable. What had been farmland was now a wasteland of corpses, broken weapons, and shattered pride. The air reeked of death. For France, it was catastrophe. For England, it was glory. The numbers speak for themselves. 6,000 to 10,000 French dead, many of them nobles who had guided the kingdom for generations, against only a few hundred English losses. But beyond the body count lay a deeper truth. The world had changed. Agincourt proved that unity mattered more than numbers, that discipline and strategy could shatter arrogance, that technology, the longbow in this case, could rewrite the balance of power, just as firearms would do in the centuries to come. And it proved that leadership, embodied by Henry V, could turn despair into triumph. For England, Agincourt became legend, celebrated on St. Crispin's Day, immortalized by Shakespeare, remembered as the moment when a small, starving band of soldiers defied fate itself. For France, it was a wound of arrogance and disunity, a reminder of how hubris can destroy even the strongest armies. Today, the fields of Agincourt are quiet farmland once again. But if you walk there, you might still imagine the sound of arrows hissing, the cries of men drowning in mud, the roar of St. George echoing across the mist. It is a story that still matters, because Agincourt reminds us of something timeless. that history is not always decided by the biggest army, but by the courage of those who refuse to yield, and by leaders willing to share danger with their people. And perhaps, most of all, it reminds us of the thin line between triumph and disaster. If you found this journey through history moving, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to History in Motion for more untold stories of battles, empires, and mysteries that shaped our world. Because history isn't just the past, it's the mirror of who we are today.